My name is Ethan, and I have a story that you might find hard to believe. But I assure you, every word is true. From the day my brother Caleb and I were born, we were destined to be inseparable. We are identical twins, and since we were little, people always commented on how we were the perfect copy of each other. Our connection was something many would find unusual. It wasn't just the fact that we looked alike, but it was as if we could read each other's thoughts. I remember countless times when Caleb would finish my sentences or I would complete his. This kind of connection, almost like telepathy, made us even closer. Our childhood was full of adventures. We spent hours exploring the dense forest behind our house. There we were kings of our own world, blazing trails, building forts with branches, and telling scary stories to try to scare each other. Caleb was always the bravest, leading our expeditions, while I followed close behind, admiring his daring. When we weren't in the forest, we could be found on the school basketball court. Every afternoon, we played until the sun set. There was something magical about how we understood each other in the game, as if silent communication guided our movements. The other boys envied our synchrony, but for us, it was as natural as breathing. Our nights were reserved for endless conversations. We shared a room, and often we stayed up late, lying in our beds, discussing everything from the mysteries of the universe to the deepest secrets of our hearts. Caleb was always the perfect confidant, the brother who understood every nuance of my soul without me having to say a word. There was a kind of magic in our bond. One summer day, we decided to get a friendship tattoo. We drew small symbols on our wrists, something only we understood. That simple gesture sealed our connection in a way that seemed eternal. I could never imagine my life without Caleb by my side. To me, he was more than a brother, he was a part of me. Despite our extraordinary connection, Caleb and I had a friendly rivalry that pushed us to be better. Everything was a competition. Whether we ran to the end of the street, the race turned into an intense dispute. If we played video games, the room filled with laughter and teasing. But deep down, this rivalry only reinforced our bond. It was as if we were constantly challenging each other to push our limits, knowing the other would be there to support us, no matter the outcome. However, as we grew up, our interests began to follow different paths. Caleb, always the dreamer, found his passion in music. He could spend hours with his guitar, creating melodies that seemed to touch the soul directly. I remember nights when I would wake up to the soft sound of his compositions. Music, he said, was inspired by our adventures and the secrets we shared. Music consumed him in a way I could never fully understand, but I respected and admired his dedication. I, on the other hand, dove into the world of sports. Basketball, which was previously just a fun activity, became my passion. I trained tirelessly, determined to improve my skills and reach new heights. The basketball court became my sanctuary, the place where I could release all the energy and frustration that built up. There was something liberating about competition, the adrenaline of a well-played game. Even with these diverging interests, we always found time for each other. Caleb would come to watch my games, cheering enthusiastically, while I attended his musical performances, clapping with pride. Our paths could be different, but our friendship remained unshakable. The differences made us unique and complementary. Caleb was the artistic soul, capable of transforming emotions into music, while I was the focused athlete, always seeking the next victory. These distinctions helped us grow individually, but also tested the strength of our connection. And although our interests led us in new directions, we always knew we could count on each other, regardless of the paths we chose to follow. It was a hot summer day, and Caleb and I decided to explore a new trail we had found. We walked for hours, delving deeper into the dense woods, until by chance, we stumbled upon an old building, almost completely hidden by vegetation. The cabin was covered in moss, its wooden planks weathered by time. The windows were broken, and the door hung from a rusty hinge. It seemed to have been abandoned for decades. Caleb, with his usual curiosity, was the first to approach. I hesitated for a moment, but soon joined him, feeling the adrenaline rush through my veins. When we pushed the door, it creaked, revealing a dusty and dark interior. Sunlight filtered through cracks in the walls, illuminating dust particles that floated in the air. The cabin was small, consisting of a single room with a stone fireplace in the corner, some broken chairs, and an old table. Despite its decrepit appearance, there was something magical about the place, a sense that we had found something truly special. Caleb and I explored every corner of the cabin, our minds already imagining the possibilities. We decided that this would be our secret refuge, a place where we could escape the world and just be ourselves. We began to bring things from home to make it more cozy: lanterns, blankets, some books. Gradually, we transformed the cabin into our little sanctuary. We spent hours inside, talking about everything and nothing. That cabin became a stage for our deepest confessions. Caleb used to bring his guitar and play songs he composed right there, inspired by the tranquility and isolation of the place. I, in turn, brought a basketball and practiced shots against the trees outside while he played. It was our space of freedom, a piece of the world that belonged only to us two. I remember one particular afternoon when a storm began to form. The sound of rain hitting the cabin's roof created a hypnotic rhythm. Caleb was playing one of his melancholic melodies, and I sat next to him, lost in thought. In that moment, I felt that nothing could separate us. We were indestructible, protected by our secret cabin. On a certain night, just like any other night of celebration, it was my birthday, and the house was full of friends and family, laughter and music filling every room. Caleb was especially lively, strumming his guitar and singing for everyone. His voice always had the power to enchant anyone who heard it, and that night was no different. Outside, a gentle breeze swayed the trees, and the air was charged with the promise of a perfect night. The aroma of the chocolate cake our mother had made still lingered in the air, mixing with the familiar smell of the wood from our house. Everything seemed in harmony, one of those rare moments when life is perfect. Then I sensed the first sign that something was wrong, a faint smell of smoke. At first, I thought it might be just someone lighting a fireplace, but quickly the smell intensified, becoming unmistakable. I looked around and saw an orange glow coming from the basement. My heart raced. I ran down there, and upon opening the door, a cloud of dense smoke enveloped me, making me cough and step back. I screamed for everyone to get out of the house, but panic had already set in. People were running in all directions, trying to escape the flames that were quickly spreading. The house that had always been our home was turning into a deadly trap. Desperate, I looked for Caleb. He was upstairs, trying to save his guitar and some of his most cherished sheet music. The fire was now climbing the stairs, and every second counted. I ran up, trying to reach him, but the flames were relentless. The heat was unbearable, and the smoke burned my lungs. Our father emerged from nowhere, pulling me back, shouting that we needed to get out immediately. I resisted, trying to free myself, but he dragged me out of the house. I looked back, seeing Caleb's silhouette disappearing amid the smoke and fire. His screams of pain and despair were the last thing I heard before the house collapsed in a cacophony of cracking wood and breaking glass. Outside, the night was cold and cruelly quiet in contrast to the chaos that had happened inside. The sirens of the firefighters echoed in the distance, but I knew it was too late. Caleb, my brother, my confidant, my other half, was lost forever in the flames. As we watched the house being consumed by fire, a sense of emptiness overwhelmed me. Everything we knew, everything we loved, was disappearing before our eyes. And I knew at that moment that our lives would never be the same again. The fire department arrived too late. Our house, once a place of warmth and love, was reduced to ashes. And Caleb, my other half, was gone forever. The sorrow that followed was indescribable, a constant pain that settled in my chest and refused to go away. Our mother, who had always been the emotional strength that united us, plunged into a deep depression. She could barely get out of bed, and the days were filled with the heavy silence of a house that had once been filled with laughter. I tried to be strong, but the absence of Caleb was a black hole that sucked all the joy around. The music he played echoed in my mind, haunting me at every quiet moment. Our father threw himself into work, perhaps trying to escape the pain that enveloped us. He spent more and more time away from home, leaving my mother and me to deal with the grief in very different ways. As the months passed, my mother's behavior became increasingly erratic. There were days when she talked to herself, as if she was conversing with Caleb, and other times I found her inconsolably crying in his room, hugging his guitar. The house was impregnated with his presence, a constant reminder of the tragedy that had torn us apart. And then, on a cold winter night, the first mysterious fire occurred. I was sleeping when the smell of smoke woke me up. I ran through the hallway and found my mother's room engulfed in flames. I screamed for help, but the fire spread quickly, devouring everything in its path. She couldn't get out in time, and I was pulled out of the house by neighbors who had seen the fire and called the firefighters. I lost my mother that night. The investigators said there was no apparent cause for the fire, but I knew there was something more. The sadness and guilt consumed me, and the idea that my mother might have intentionally caused the fire haunted me. Her death devastated my father even more. He buried himself further in work, distancing himself from me and anything that reminded him of Caleb or my mother. Our communication was minimal, and the house, now marked by two tragedies, was gradually disintegrating along with our family. Years later, another fire occurred. This time it was in my father's office. The flames consumed everything, including him. Once again, there was no explanation for the fire, and once again I was left alone, feeling as though the fire was following my family, consuming us one by one. Loneliness became my only company, and the feeling that something was pursuing us grew every day. I started to notice strange things happening around me, lights flickering without reason, smells of smoke appearing out of nowhere, and a presence I couldn't explain. It was as if Caleb was trying to communicate, as if his death had triggered a series of events that I couldn't control. I felt trapped in a cycle of mourning and loss, where each new tragedy only intensified the sensation that something dark and inexplicable was surrounding us. After the deaths of my parents, the house I grew up in, the same one that was rebuilt after the fire that took Caleb, became a place of constant haunting. The grief enveloped me like a dense fog, but I soon began to realize there was something more, something I couldn't understand or explain. That was when the strange occurrences began to intensify. At first, they were just subtle sensations. A chill down my spine as I walked down the hallway, a whisper almost imperceptible when I was alone in my room. I thought it was my mind playing tricks, a result of trauma and loneliness. But these sensations became impossible to ignore. Lights would start flickering without apparent reason. I changed the bulbs, checked the wiring, but nothing solved it. Sometimes, the lights would just go out completely, plunging the house into oppressive darkness, only to flare back on with almost blinding intensity. Each time this happened, I felt a presence beside me, an invisible shadow that seemed to watch every move I made. The smell of smoke was perhaps the most disturbing of all. It arose from nowhere, permeating the air with its acrid, suffocating odor. I ran through the house, searching for the source, but never found anything. It was as if the very memory of the past fires was materializing around me, bringing back the horror of losing my family. Objects also began to move. I would leave something in one place and find it in a completely different one. Once, I woke up to find Caleb's guitar, which I had stored in the attic, resting next to my bed. The strings were broken, but still emitted a soft sound when I ran my hand over them, a sound that seemed to mourn along with me. The nights were the worst. Sometimes, I woke up in the middle of the night with a sensation of weight on my chest, as if someone was sitting on me. My eyes would open, and I could swear I saw Caleb's silhouette in the corner of the room, looking at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. On other nights, I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow and dragging, that stopped right in front of my door. I tried to rationalize, telling myself that all this was the result of stress, of pain. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more intense the occurrences became. The feeling that Caleb was trying to reach me, that he was trapped between this world and the next, tormented me day and night. It was as if the entire house was alive, pulsing with a dark energy that reflected the tragedy that had befallen us. Every sound, every smell, every shadow seemed to be loaded with meaning, a desperate message from a brother I couldn't fully understand. The night when everything culminated began like the others, with the familiar smell of smoke permeating the air. But this time, there was something different. The smell was more intense, more real, and it brought with it a sense of imminence. I was in my room, trying to convince myself that everything was in my head, when the lights began to flicker violently. The air grew thick, suffocating, and I heard a sound coming from downstairs. Dragging, heavy footsteps ascending the stairs. My heart raced, and every fiber of my being told me to run, but something stronger kept me in place. I knew I had to face what was coming. The door to my room slowly opened, revealing the nebulous figure of Caleb. His form was indistinct but unmistakable. His eyes, which once were windows to his vibrant soul, now were deep wells of sadness and pain. He moved slowly forward, and each step seemed to carry the weight of all the tragedies we had lived through. Why? My voice came out in a shaky whisper, but I needed to ask. Why are you doing this? Caleb's figure stopped, and for a moment, silence was absolute. Then he raised his hand, pointing at me, and I felt a wave of emotions, pain, regret, love, all mixed into a whirlwind that nearly knocked me down. It was as if he was trying to communicate, but words couldn't bridge the gap that separated us. The smell of smoke grew stronger, and I began to feel heat. I looked around and saw that the walls of the room were beginning to light up with an orange glow, as if the fire was about to consume them. Caleb! I cried out in desperation. Forgive me. I miss you so much. I would do anything to have you back. Flames began to lick the walls, and the heat became unbearable. But amidst the chaos, something changed in Caleb's expression. His figure began to fade, and for a moment, I saw a sad smile on his lips. The weight on my chest lightened, and I knew he was listening. I'm sorry, I continued, tears streaming down my face. I should have done more, I should have saved you. But I love you, and I will always love you. With those words, the flames began to recede, and Caleb's figure disappeared completely. The sensation of his presence, which before was an overwhelming burden, now became a gentle, comforting breeze. The fire extinguished, leaving only the lingering smell of smoke as a reminder of what had happened. I fell to my knees, exhausted but with a newfound sense of peace. Caleb had reached me, and I had finally made peace with him. The house was silent, but it was no longer the oppressive silence of before. It was a silence of conclusion, of a cycle finally closed. I knew that this was not the end of my journey, but it was the end of an important part of it. And as I stood up, I felt that, in some way, Caleb was at peace too. From that night on, something within me changed. The confrontation with Caleb, feeling his presence, and finally expressing my regret and love brought a sense of closure I had never experienced before. The house, which once seemed like a mausoleum haunted by memories and pain, now was silent, but a different kind of silence, a silence of peace. The days that followed were a blur of mixed emotions. There was still grief, of course, the kind of longing that would never fully disappear. But along with it, I felt a lightness, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I could breathe without that constant oppression in my chest. I began to open the windows of the house, letting the sunlight in to illuminate the dark corners I had long avoided. Each ray of sun seemed to purify the environment a bit more, driving away the shadows that once dominated the place. The smell of smoke, which had previously permeated everything, gradually disappeared, replaced by fresh and clean air. I returned to the things I loved. I resumed playing basketball, finding new joy in the game that had once been a mere escape. With every shot, I felt as if I was releasing a bit more of the accumulated pain, transforming it into energy and determination. I also began playing Caleb's guitar, trying to recreate the melodies he composed. I wasn't as good as him, but I felt that, in some way, I was honoring his memory, keeping his passion alive. I sought help, something I had always hesitated to do. Talking with a therapist helped me process the traumas, to understand that I didn't have to carry the weight of the world alone. Through these sessions, I began to accept that the tragedy that struck our family was not my fault. It was an important step towards healing, a recognition that I had the right to live and seek happiness, even after so much pain. Gradually, I rebuilt my life. I made new friends, reconnected with old ones. I found comfort in small things, a walk in the park, an interesting book, a heartfelt conversation. And in each of these experiences, I felt Caleb's presence, not as a ghost haunting me, but as a silent force urging me forward. The house, which once was a symbol of loss, became a place of precious memories. I keep a photo of Caleb in the living room, next to the guitar. Not as a constant reminder of sadness, but as a tribute to the brother who will always be with me, in spirit. Next to it, I also placed photos of my parents, reminders of the happy moments we shared before the tragedies that separated us. These images, side by side, are a tribute to the family we once were and to the people who, despite everything, continue to live in my heart. Now, looking towards the future, I see possibilities and hope. The journey to healing is long, and I know there will be difficult days. But I also know that Caleb, my mother, and my father would be proud of me, for finding strength in adversity and for moving forward with my head held high. And that certainty gives me peace, a peace that I have long sought and finally found.